direct it to the agency, and basically, I mean, it's just, you know, this is who I am, right? Here's my contact information. Here's what I'm, oh, there you go. Here's what I'm looking for, right? I request access to and a copy of blank, and then so on and so on. You just fill in. Here's who I am. Here's what I want. Here's how much I'm willing to pay for it. You want to cap out the amount of fees because you don't want them coming back at you with an IOU for $3,000, and then a deadline. You know, here's when I want it by. And presto, you hit click, and it will fill in the law for the applicable state that you're in. So if you're making a request under the New Mexico Public Records Act, it will fill in the language from the New Mexico Public Records Act. So it's a good little time saver. And actually, my friend Dave Collier, who here is from the University of Arizona? Anybody? Yeah, Dave Collier, who teaches at Arizona, actually did an academic study about different types of public records request letters. And the one that came back as the most effective one was this one, and the reason is it's the nastiest one. It's the meanest, nastiest one, and it says at the end, if you don't give it to me by the deadline, we'll sue you. And apparently that's like the magic sesame word, is, you know, threatening people with a lawsuit. So go figure. You know, you can't, you get more, the stick gets more results than the carrot. But I kind of thought what I would do, you know, and I really want to make this very practical and useful for you guys that have specific issues that you have run up against. I want to talk first a little bit about federal education privacy law and what that does and doesn't cover, and how you can get around that objection when somebody tells you you can't have X because of federal education privacy law. So I want to address that, and I want to show you some excellent examples of some cool public records work that people have done at other publications that maybe will prompt some ideas or maybe inspire you to think about localizing those on your own campus. The last SPLC plug that I'm going to give, if you go to the scroll down a little bit on the homepage, you'll see these entries that say SPLC blog, SPLC blog. Our blog, which you can subscribe to the RSS for that, every Tuesday we put a new public records tip on there. We call it Transparency Tuesday. So every Tuesday there's a new blog item, and it's usually keyed off of a cool story that somebody has done, like, hey, try this at home, guys. Here's something that the LA Times did. Here's something that the Washington Post did. Try this at home. So we try to make it very practical, like, you know, here are the records they used, and here's how they got them, and here's how you can get them too. So there is a handout here that I'm not going to bother passing around, but please snag a copy on the way out. It's also on our website under the Know Your Rights section. The Know Your Rights section of the website has all of our legal guides. When I first came to the SPLC, I didn't have any clue really what FERPA was, and I don't know how many of you have run up against the dreaded FERPA word. I see a couple people nodding in the audience. If you cover education at all, if you cover education at any level, K through 12 or higher ed, sooner or later you're going to be told you can't have X information because it falls under federal confidentiality law. And I will tell you that about half of the time you're being told that, it's wrong. About half of the time you're being told that, it is a misapplication of federal privacy law. And what's interesting is the courts understand this. Judges have no problem figuring out what is and is not a confidential piece of educational information, but there's a disconnect between the way schools and colleges interpret privacy law and the way that judges with common sense interpret it. And unless you're willing to sue them, or you can show them an identical twin case, a case of your exact situation, your exact facts, the exact document, the exact state, you're probably going to still butt your head up against the FERPA brick wall. So just real quickly, for those who have not encountered this, right? FERPA is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. Oh, in fact, we have a link to this on the homepage, so I can just call it up there. There we go, FERPA and Access to Public Records. Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act was passed specifically to keep schools and colleges from distributing people's academic information and their aptitude tests, their IQ tests, things like that, that you and I and anybody with any sort of, you know, sense of decency would not want to distribute about ourselves and would never really want to publish, right? I mean, you as a journalist, when would you ever want to put somebody's grades in the paper? When would you ever want to put somebody's grades on a website, right? Almost never would there be a newsworthy justification for that. So we all understand that that is properly subject to federal confidentiality law. The problem is that Congress wrote this law in such a half-assed, sloppy way, and then the U.S. Department of Education, which is in charge of interpreting it, has this sort of privacy evangelism, where they believe that, you know, their goal is to frustrate reporters. Their mission is not just to keep things confidential that should be confidential, but to affirmatively stop you from finding stuff out. And so they interpret FERPA in this incredibly expansive way that gives schools and colleges a lot of cover to withhold things that they want to withhold. For example, the Columbus Dispatch did a superb series about a year and a half ago, for which they won the SPJ's First Amendment Award, about college athletic departments. And they did like an open records audit, basically, where they fanned out around the country and sent the same set of requests to every major college athletic department. We want these 3 types of records. And even though they're records that should have been public information under just about every state's Open Records Act, they got this vast array of varying responses up to, okay, you can have 1 and 2 but not 3, or you can have 1 and 3 but not 2, or you can have half of 1 and 3/4 of 3 but none of 2, or you can have 0 of all of them. And all of them were purporting to apply the very same federal privacy law, but doing it in completely inconsistent ways. And that became their story. The misunderstanding of federal privacy law became their story. The kinds of things that people were claiming were private were, for example, they wanted the list of people who flew on the football team airplane, the passenger list, the manifest of a football team airplane. And they got many colleges writing back to them that, I'm sorry, that's a confidential educational record under federal privacy law. Well, you know, not really, right? I mean, think about it. The football team gets on the plane in front of dozens of cheering fans. They get off the plane in front of dozens of cheering fans. This is not a private activity, right? There's nothing confidential about it. There's nothing secret about it. They wear numbers. You can figure out who they are, right? I mean, they're identifiable people. You're not giving away any kind of, you know, we know who went to the game. We saw the play, right? We know they probably didn't walk. There's no reason why that should be confidential. There's no reason why that should be confidential, and yet many schools would write back and say, well, looks like it mentions a student, and if it mentions a student, that's good enough for us, it's confidential. That's not the way the courts, thankfully, are interpreting FERPA. The way they're interpreting FERPA is in 2 ways. Generally speaking, what courts say is the record has to be actually about the student in the way that would wind up being put in. Remember how they used to threaten you at school? This is going on your permanent record. This is going on your permanent record. It's got to go on your permanent record to be a FERPA record. It's got to be something that would actually be, if you showed up at your registrar's office and you said, I would like to see my records, it's got to be in that file that they would hand you, right? If you showed up at your registrar's office and you said, I want to see my records, do you think they would say, 5 or 6 years ago, you ran for the student senate, and I bet there's a file somewhere over in student government with some election returns, so hang on, let us run over to student government and flip through those election returns and see if we can find those. Right? Of course not. They know that's not a FERPA record when you want to ask for it. But there are schools who have said that student government election records are FERPA records. That a student had to sue the University of Florida last year, had to sue the University of Florida to get minutes and transcripts and videotapes of public meetings of the Student Senate. In other words, a meeting that you and I would have been within our legal rights to sit in, audio record, video record, take notes of, in public, became magically a confidential education record because it was stored in a file cabinet somewhere in the university. It was magically transmogrified into a FERPA educational record. And that's nuts, right? I mean, we all know that in order for something to be a confidential education record, at one time the information in it actually had to be confidential. And that information in a student senate meeting was never confidential. So you can't make it into a confidential education record just by reducing it to printed or recorded form. But from time to time we hear that argument. Go ahead.
What do you do when it's a really urgent time situation? I had one where there was a missing kid, missing teen. Sheriff, for whatever reason, hadn't told the media the kid was missing for 2 weeks, even though 2 weeks after he went missing, they found his Jeep abandoned with a flat tire, 26 miles off-road in the desert, you know, and we had different stories. And the school did not want to even tell me when they reported the kid missing. Did you ever when did law enforcement ever come in? When was the first And they didn't care a squat
Did
about
you
it.
use the whole quote, including the I'll sue you part?
That's it.
Yeah.